The first thing that pierced the heavy, oppressive air of the residence was its profound silence. Not the kind that soothes, but a thick, humming stillness that coiled around you, a silent warning. Then my gaze snagged on it, her wedding band, abandoned on the cool ceramic edge of the bathroom basin. No hurried note, no hastily scrawled apology, just the gold band glinting, stark and unapologetic, as if celebrating its newfound liberty. Ready to uncover the secret to ultimate freedom? That was the precise moment the truth slammed into me. Dahlia Ashton wasn't returning that night. It wasn't a novel experience for Dahlia to push boundaries, to dance on the precipice of our unspoken rules. But this felt different. This wasn't a clumsy misstep or a rash decision born of fleeting emotion. This was deliberate, calculated, almost cruelly precise. I allowed myself one check, just one, of her shared location. She was at Julian O'Malley's residence. The very Julian she'd once sworn was a relic of her college past. A man who, in her words, made her feel insignificant and small. Apparently, small was exactly what she needed again. Just 8 hours prior, she'd breezy mentioned a quick drink with old friends. A nostalgic, harmless gathering, she'd described it, like a tedious high school reunion. Yet here I was approaching 2 a.m. Her toothbrush, still damp from earlier use, mocked me from its holder. No packed bag, no note. But she didn't need to. Dahlia knew I'd meticulously pieced together the fragments of her deceit. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, the cool wood offering no comfort. I waited, though for what, I couldn't say. Perhaps an apology, a text message, anything to whisper. I didn't mean to wound you, I just got swept away. But the digital silence was absolute. Only the ring perched on the sink seemed to reverberate, its metallic gleam a constant, mocking echo. Earlier that day, she'd manufactured a fight over something utterly trivial. "You forgot to retrieve the poultry from the freezer," she'd accused, her voice sharper than necessary. Now, in the chilling clarity of pre-dawn, I realized it wasn't about the frozen chicken at all. It was a flimsy pretext, any excuse to validate a decision already cemented. "I just need some breathing room," she'd snapped, snatching her car keys. "Go embrace your frozen bird if you care so profoundly." That was her cutting, Dahlia-esque way of declaring she was going to Julian's party, regardless of my feelings. And I hadn't stopped her. I hadn't voiced the words that burned on my tongue, hadn't begged her to stay, because a sliver of me, that pathetic, resilient part that still clung to the remnants of our bond, yearned to witness how far she would truly venture. Well, she had journeyed far indeed. Now I sat shrouded in the oppressive dark, my gaze fixed on the hallway, half expecting her to burst through the door, a sudden revelation of her error etched across her face, but she didn't come home. What if the silence is the loudest message of all? Instead, a different resolve ignited within me. I rose, my movements slow and deliberate, and crossed into our bedroom. My hand went to the small, ornate wooden drawer in her vanity, a compartment she always kept meticulously locked, as if it harbored something sacred or, perhaps, perilous. For months I hadn't touched it. She'd once dismissed it as a place for feminine things, and like a naive fool, I had respected her privacy, never questioned, never pried. I aspired to be the kind of husband who honored such boundaries. Here's what no one tells you about trust in relationships. What a devastating joke that now seemed. But that night, with her ring still mocking me from the bathroom sink and her deafening silence permeating every corner of our once shared home, boundaries ceased to exist. My fingers, trembling with a volatile cocktail of fear, anger, and something far more insidious, that quiet, suffocating blend of both, located the spare key tucked behind a forgotten earring in her jewelry box. The tremor wasn't just physical, it was the shaking of my entire world. The drawer yielded with a faint, hesitant creak, and what I beheld within its depths shattered my universe. Photographs. Not an overwhelming stack, just a handful, printed, not digital, on thick matte paper. They lay face down, as if hastily concealed, yet positioned for easy retrieval. My stomach coiled as I picked them up one by one. The first image depicted her and Julian, not merely smiling, not simply standing in proximity. They were seated at a dimly lit bar, his hand resting intimately on her thigh, her head nestled against his shoulder, with an ease that suggested they were 17 again, as if the past decade of our marriage had simply vanished. The second photo was a punch to the gut. They were in what appeared to be a rustic cabin, perhaps from a weekend escape I had never known about. Dahlia, wrapped in his oversized hoodie, barefoot, held a steaming coffee mug, her gaze directed out a window with that soft, faraway smile I had always believed was reserved exclusively for me. A deafening roar filled my ears. I felt a dizzying lurch, as if the floor beneath me had dramatically tilted. It wasn't just that I was losing her. I realized with a sickening clarity that I had already lost her, perhaps months ago, and she had left the irrefutable evidence right there, carefully hidden, yet unmistakably there. She wanted me to discover this. Not tonight, perhaps, but eventually. She wanted me to grasp the lingering embers of her affection for him, to know I had competition, to understand I wasn't enough, but she lacked the courage to articulate it aloud. So she resorted to breadcrumbs, the abandoned ring, the overnight disappearance, the silent dare to see precisely how far she could push me. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the damning photograph still clutched in my lap, and a realization even more agonizing washed over me. She hadn't merely betrayed me in the moment. She had meticulously prepared for this betrayal, planned it, even preserved its memory, as if it held profound significance. This changed my life in 30 days, and you won't believe how. And perhaps that was the precise instant something within me irrevocably broke, not with a dramatic, shattering crash of plates or a volley of shouts. No, it broke in that quiet, desolate way, when all the futile begging and desperate hoping finally, irrevocably, runs dry. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply rose, walked to the closet, and retrieved my old duffel bag. If she craved space, I was prepared to grant her an immeasurable expanse of it. But not before I left her a return gesture, a parting gift, something she would never anticipate. And when she eventually walked through that front door later that day, her face would tell the entire story. My departure wasn't a tempest. There were no dramatic slamming doors, no furious shouting matches, no cinematic scenes where I declared my brokenness. I packed slowly, methodically, quietly. I folded each shirt with calm, deliberate movements, zipped the duffel bag with steady fingers. Yet with every item of clothing I placed inside, my pulse throbbed a deafening rhythm in my ears. This wasn't merely about leaving, it was about how I chose to leave. You see, I'm not the kind of man who crafts grand speeches or sets fire to someone's vehicle in a fit of rage. I am the kind of man who allows pain to seep deep, to take root in the profound quiet of my soul. And then, when the time is precisely right, I compose lists. Yes, lists. And that morning, while Dahlia was still wherever she was, likely entwined in someone else's sheets or desperately trying to convince herself of closure, I settled at our kitchen table and penned the most crucial list of my existence. It bore the stark title, Things You Left Behind Without Noticing. It wasn't extensive, but every bullet point was a razor-sharp shard of the marriage I had tirelessly attempted to sustain, while she indulged in nostalgic reveries with her ex-lover. The night I stayed awake until 4 a.m., meticulously proofreading your critical grant application, while you slept soundly. The carefully curated playlist I painstakingly assembled for your mother's funeral, when you were too overcome with grief to select a single song. That agonizing night I endured a blinding migraine, refusing to seek medical attention because Julian texted you at midnight and you declared an urgent need to talk. The entire week I prepared dinner every single evening, even though you never returned home before 10 p.m. The ring, the very one you casually discarded on the sink as if it were nothing more than an inconvenient receipt you couldn't be bothered to carry. At the very bottom of this inventory, I inscribed one final, poignant sentence. I hope the past clutches you tighter than I ever could. I placed the note centrally on the bed, directly on her pillow, that ridiculously floral pillowcase she'd insisted on buying. despite my lavender allergy. I remained there for a minute, my gaze sweeping across the room, which now felt utterly alien, as if it already belonged to someone else. And perhaps, truly it did. Before my final departure, I performed one last act. I disconnected our shared streaming music account, not out of petty spite, but because I simply couldn't bear the thought of our old playlists unexpectedly shuffling into my headphones, like auditory ghosts. I logged out of our shared grocery list application. I canceled the couple's pottery class I had optimistically enrolled us in, solely because she'd once wistfully mentioned missing working with her hands. And I left the house keys on the kitchen counter, next to a half-burnt vanilla candle and a cracked phone charger she'd perpetually neglected to replace. Then I walked out the front door, quietly. No text message, no elaborate explanation. Just the list, the profound silence, and my stark, undeniable absence. It wasn't until many hours later, sometime around 6 p.m., that she finally returned. I knew because my phone, left intentionally on silent, flashed with her name 7 times. No voicemails, just the insistent illumination of her calls again and again. But I didn't answer. She desired space. She yearned to feel something. She wished to punish me for transgressions I couldn't even name. Well, now she possessed all the silence in the world, and she hadn't the faintest idea what to do with it. What if the one thing you crave is the thing that finally breaks you? But this, I knew, was far from over, because the very next day she came searching for me, and what she uncovered made her question everything she thought she knew. She materialized at my sister's home on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, as if she hadn't just systematically excised me from our shared life. I was seated on the porch swing, sipping lukewarm instant coffee from a chipped mug, when her car pulled up. I knew it was Dahlia even before I looked. Her tires always let out that familiar, high-pitched squeal when she executed a turn too sharply, as if she were perpetually trying to outrun whatever emotion currently consumed her. Typical Dahlia Ashton. She didn't alight immediately. She sat for a full minute, her gaze fixed intently on the steering wheel, as if it, too, had somehow betrayed her. Then she opened the door, stepped out with a deliberate slowness, and ascended the steps with the hesitant gait of someone approaching a crime scene. She knocked on my sister's front door with the tentative rap of a stranger. I said nothing at first, merely observing her as she stood there, clad in oversized sunglasses and a denim jacket, clinging to the illusion of control over her own narrative. Finally, I rose from within the house and walked to the door. I opened it halfway, leaning against the frame, offering no implicit invitation to enter. Not yet. Her eyes, shielded by the dark lenses, scanned my form, searching, I imagined, for something familiar, something broken. She appeared nervous, perhaps unprepared to find me standing upright, composed. Maybe she had anticipated tears, or a furious outburst. Perhaps she'd hoped I would crumble just enough to allow her back in, without the need for spoken words. "Callan," she began, her voice soft, carefully rehearsed. "Can we talk?" I remained immobile. "About what?" Her lips parted, then closed. No words emerged. She glanced over her shoulder as if the quiet suburban street might offer her a script. "I returned home, and you were simply gone." I offered a slow, deliberate nod. A frown creased her brow. "And you didn't say anything." That was it. That singular complaint struck a nerve. She had spent a night at her ex's party, jettisoned her wedding ring like a discarded wrapper, and now she was indignant that I hadn't provided her with closure. I stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind me, creating a stark barrier. "You desired space, Dahlia. I granted it to you. That's not what I—" She started, then trailed off, her hands nervously picking at the cuff of her sleeve. "I didn't believe you'd actually leave." That single sentence, those 6 words illuminated everything. She craved the drama. She desired the guilt. She wanted me shattered, a broken moon forever orbiting a planet that no longer acknowledged its tides. She never expected me to simply vanish. Not entirely. She anticipated pain, perhaps some desperate pleading, not a list, not silence, not distance. Why do we always expect pain to look a certain way? I discovered the photographs, I stated flatly. The color drained from her face. I surmised you might have, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It wasn't what it seemed. I let out a single dry, weary laugh. Then you'll need to meticulously explain precisely how you and your ancient history ended up on a secluded cabin weekend getaway, all while I was ordering takeout and naively pretending our lives were merely busy. Her eyes welled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity, no lingering affection, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The kind of weariness that arises from desperately clinging to a life that the other person had irrevocably abandoned months, perhaps even a year ago. I didn't plan to inflict pain upon you, she insisted. I met her gaze unwavering. But you didn't plan not to either. She took a tentative step closer. Can we just converse somewhere private? I shook my head slowly. There's nothing left to say, Dahlia. You made your choice. I simply finally heard you. And then I performed an act I never believed myself capable of. I walked away from her mid-sentence. I didn't glance back. Not when she called my name, her voice laced with desperation. Not even when the sound of her quiet sobbing finally reached my ears. Because a fundamental truth had at last settled within me. The antithesis of love is not hatred. It is indifference. And for the first time in years, I felt it. But Dahlia Ashton was far from finished, not even close. 2 days after her theatrical display of tears on the porch, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It contained a single chilling line. You might find this interesting. Attached was a photograph. Dahlia and Julian again. Only this time it wasn't a faded cabin photo from some clandestine past. This was recent. Last weekend, a selfie. Dahlia clutching a wine glass. Julian's arm unmistakably wrapped around her waist. Both of them were grinning, a private joke shared between them, oblivious to the world. Her red dress, vibrant and defiant. My stomach churned. I had no idea anyone had taken that photo, let alone decided to dispatch it directly to me. But there it was, dated and time-stamped 3 hours after. She'd claimed she needed space. Here's what no one tells you about betrayal in the digital age. I didn't respond to the anonymous number. I no longer required further evidence. What I desperately needed was to cease doubting my own intuition. All this time I had agonized, wondering if I had misread the signs, if I had overreacted, if perhaps I should have allowed her to explain, granted her the benefit of the doubt. But there it was, stark and undeniable. She hadn't merely betrayed me emotionally. She had orchestrated it into an event, a photo opportunity. I didn't succumb to an explosive fit of rage. Instead, something far deeper settled within me, a cold, sharp clarity. She wasn't returning for me. She was returning because she had lost control of her carefully constructed narrative. She had anticipated my waiting, my silent suffering, my spiral into despair. She likely envisioned me sending lengthy, pleading texts, leaving tearful voicemails, perhaps even flowers at her door. But I did none of those things. I simply vanished. That, I realized, was what truly terrified her. And now for her, it was only growing worse, because the silence I offered was becoming deafeningly loud. Later that same day, she appeared at my workplace, strolling in with an audacious air of normalcy. My coworkers froze, their gazes fixed on her, unsure whether to intervene or discreetly grab popcorn. She marched directly to my desk and declared, "We need to speak right now." I rose, calm as ever, and led her outside. We stood in the parking lot, under the relentless, blistering sun. This time, she wasn't meticulously put together. No lipstick, no carefully curled hair. Her voice trembled slightly. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. I simply blinked. "Doing what?" "This disappearing act. You left. You severed all contact. You're acting as if I'm some villain." I tilted my head slightly. "Aren't you?" Her mouth opened, then closed. No words. She looked around, as if waiting for a cue that never came. Julian meant nothing. It was merely, I just needed to feel something. There it was. the sentence she had undoubtedly practiced countless times in front of a mirror. I needed to feel something. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. You did feel something, Dahlia. You felt power. You reveled in watching me flinch. You enjoyed holding the match just close enough to the curtain, fully aware that I was too afraid to stop you. But you miscalculated. She looked utterly stunned. So that's it? You're done? I offered the barest hint of a smile. I was done the moment I realized your love had a finite expiration date. She recoiled, a flush creeping up her neck. You're being cruel. No, I countered, my voice unwavering. I'm being clear. There's a significant distinction. She offered no reply, simply stood there, shell-shocked, as if she had never once imagined a version of the story where she was the one being left behind. She walked away without another syllable, but something deep within me cautioned that she wasn't finished. Not yet. Because for individuals like Dahlia, control is not a thing easily relinquished, and I had just definitively seized it from her. 3 days unfolded in quiet succession. No calls, no texts, no sudden, jarring appearances in parking lots. A fragile hope began to unfurl within me, suggesting that perhaps she had finally let go. Finally accepted that I wouldn't be the man who clung desperately to the wreckage, begging for scraps. But when Dahlia Ashton's world begins to unravel, she doesn't accept defeat. She rewrites the entire story. What if the villain of your story thinks they're the hero? I discovered her narrative revision in progress when I received a message from Amelia Monroe, one of our mutual acquaintances. Amelia and Dahlia had worked together years ago, their friendship having naturally drifted, yet they still maintained a casual connection on social media. The message began with a cautious, "Hey, Callan, I'm completely in the dark about what's happening between you two, but you really need to see this." Attached were screenshots of a group chat. Dahlia had been meticulously spinning a tale, informing everyone that I had abandoned her, that I had emotionally manipulated her for years, and that her night with Julian had been nothing more than a desperate cry for help, not an act of betrayal. She even claimed I had vanished without warning, absconded with money from our joint account, packed my belongings in secret, and ghosted her as if I were some shady one-night stand. Not a single word about the ring she'd left on the sink. No mention of the incriminating photographs in the locked drawer. No confession about the party, her overnight disappearance, or the messages I knew she had meticulously deleted from her phone before she eventually returned home that day. She was artfully transforming herself into the heartbroken wife, simultaneously painting me as the cold, calculating deserter. That's when I knew she wasn't just trying to win me back. She was trying to win. I didn't respond to Amelia. I didn't rush to clear my name or compose a lengthy, self-righteous post explaining my side. I didn't publish screenshots or parade receipts. I allowed her to speak. I let her spin her intricate web because I possessed something she did not, the truth. But truth, I understood, isn't always sufficient on its own. So I decided it was time to reclaim control, not through vengeance, not through exposure, but through the one thing she never expected from me, kindness. A real, cold, undeniable kindness. Here's why true kindness can be the ultimate power move. The following morning, I transferred my half of our remaining joint savings into a new separate account, leaving the entirety of the rest for her. I emailed her access to our shared cloud drive, accompanied by a terse, simple note. Everything you'll need for the tax documents is in here. I will not block your access. I then dispatched a message to our landlord, formally removing myself from the lease agreement. And finally, I sent her a formal notice containing my new mailing address and the precise time I had arranged to collect the remainder of my personal belongings, ensuring she would not be present. No drama, no confrontation, just pure, professional detachment. But that wasn't the ultimate twist. The true unexpected turn arrived when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. It was Julian. Yes. Him. His voice sounded nervous, hesitant, utterly devoid of the arrogance or smugness I had so often imagined. "Callan," he began, his tone low. "Look, I know I have absolutely no right to contact you, but you might want to know something." I remained silent, offering no encouragement. I believe she's manipulating both of us, he stated quietly. She informed me you two were already separated, that you had moved out months ago, that the marriage was essentially over. Still, I said nothing. And last night, he added, his voice gaining a bewildered edge, she told me she wanted to pursue something serious with me. She called you toxic, manipulative, but something just didn't quite add up. I checked her messages after she fell asleep. I saw the text. She's been texting you as if she's desperately trying to repair things. That revelation hit me like a sudden icy gust of wind to the chest. Not because I hadn't anticipated such a possibility, but because a pathetic leftover corner of my heart had still harbored the faint hope that perhaps she was merely lost. Not calculating, not cruel, but she was far worse than I had ever dared to imagine. Even Julian sounded genuinely stunned. I'm finished with it, he declared, his voice firm. Just thought you deserved to know. I thanked him, and then I ended the call. I stared at the blank wall for a long, immeasurable time afterward, attempting to process the surreal absurdity of my wife's affair partner being the one to offer me a semblance of closure. But it wasn't complete closure yet, not entirely, because Dahlia Ashton still had one more move left to make, and I, Callan Finch, had a decision to make. In 7 days, your life could change, but will it be for better or worse? I had erroneously believed Julian's call would mark the final twist, the definitive conclusion of a story I had never asked to be a part of. But people like Dahlia don't simply fade away quietly. They do not accept endings unless they are the sole authors of those endings. So, when she resurfaced, once again at my sister's residence, mascara-streaked tears cascading down her face, a pathetic bouquet of tulips clutched in her hand, as if such an offering could somehow erase everything, I knew instinctively that something was deeply amiss. This wasn't genuine guilt. This wasn't authentic heartbreak. This was an expertly choreographed performance. She didn't even bother to knock. She simply walked in, behaving as if she belonged there, as if she hadn't already shattered every last shard of trust I had once so carefully placed in her. She found me in the kitchen, idly stirring a lukewarm cup of herbal tea. For a fleeting second, I considered retreating from the room, escaping before she could launch into one of her award-winning monologues. Instead, I simply met her gaze and asked flatly, "What now?" Her bottom lip quivered, a practiced tremor. "I've ruined everything, Callan." "I know that now," I replied, my eyebrow raised ever so slightly. "Now?" She took a tentative step closer. "You left, and it was as if the very floor beneath me vanished. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. I didn't know who I was without you." For a fleeting instant, I yearned to believe her. The sight of her, disheveled, appearing genuinely broken, stirred a painful ache within me. But then, the image of that photograph resurfaced, the memory of the deleted messages, the carefully spun narrative she'd sold to our mutual friends, the chilling way she had looked at me when she'd declared I needed to feel something. "Why are you really here?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. She hesitated, just for a beat, just long enough to betray the flicker of panic in her eyes. Then she whispered, "Because I miss you, and I desperately want to fix this." That was her strategy, not honesty, not accountability, just pure, unadulterated manipulation, cloaked in a veneer of sentimentality. She wanted me to forget everything, to obediently fall back into our domestic charade, and a weaker version of myself, the Callan of months ago, might have succumbed. But not this time. Stop. Read this before you give in to old patterns. "You told Julian I was toxic," I stated quietly. Her face froze. "You told him our marriage was already over. You sent him messages the very same night you came crying to me, desperate to fix things with me." Dahlia recoiled as if I'd physically struck her. "He called you?" I nodded. "He did. And unlike you, he didn't lie." She struggled visibly to maintain her composure, her mask threatening to crack. "He's just bitter. I ended things with him. He's attempting to sabotage any chance we have left." "No, Dahlia," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. You ruined it. Every deceitful text, every calculated lie, every meticulously twisted version of events. You did that. She stood there cornered, her lips pressed tightly together. And then came the fissure. The real Dahlia Ashton, raw and venomous, slipped through the polished surface. Her voice sharpened, her eyes narrowed, gleaming with contempt. You're not perfect, Callan. You were always too passive, too soft. I had to beg you to fight for me. No, I calmly countered. You had to beg me to tolerate being disrespected. She fell silent, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury, as if she simply couldn't comprehend why her script was no longer working. Then, with a furious sweep, she hurled the tulips into the sink and stormed out. That was the last time I saw her face to face. But it wasn't truly over. The following day I was served. Dahlia had filed for separation, not divorce, separation. She wanted to keep her options open, to retain some measure of access, to hold the door ajar, to, in her mind, still win. But I had already made my decision, and what I did next made her finally realize she had lost something she would never, ever reclaim. The official-looking envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 2 full days before I finally opened it. Separation papers, not divorce, because even now Dahlia Ashton couldn't bring herself to sever ties completely. It was a calculated maneuver designed to keep me in an agonizing limbo, to ensure the door remained perpetually cracked, just in case her other life didn't pan out, just in case I remained weak enough to return. But the man she believed she had left behind no longer resided within those walls. I signed the papers swiftly, quietly, without adding a single note or message. I personally walked them to the post office, handed them over the counter, and felt a profound, unexpected sensation settle in my chest. Not sadness, not anger, just an immense, cleansing relief. The day after that, I returned to the apartment one last time. During the prearranged time we had agreed upon, I systematically packed the remainder of my belongings. The things she hadn't already donated or carelessly boxed up as if I were merely an old discarded phase. I noticed she had rearranged the living room, replacing our framed photographs with impersonal abstract art, and to my wry amusement, she had thrown out my favorite coffee mugs. It was as if I had never existed there at all, and that I realized was perfectly fine. I didn't desire the old version of that life back. I didn't want to exist within someone else's revisionist history. What I truly wanted, and what I had finally attained, was my own narrative, my own air to breathe, my own hard-won peace. And life somehow began to bloom again. I reconnected with people I had inadvertently pushed away during the slow, agonizing collapse of our marriage. Old friends, co-workers who used to extend invitations, but had eventually stopped when I consistently declined. I moved into a small, sun-drenched apartment across town. Nothing extravagant, but it was unequivocally mine. I painted the walls a ridiculous shade of green that I loved for no discernible reason. I acquired a houseplant I had absolutely no idea how to care for, and slowly, wonderfully, I began to sleep again. Truly sleep. Without checking the clock at 2 a.m., without wondering if she would ever come home. The most extraordinary part, I began to feel like me again. Not the version she had slowly, meticulously erased. Not the version that desperately tried to keep things afloat while she lit matches beneath the foundation. Just Callan, quiet, thoughtful, still, but no longer drowning. A few weeks ago, I unexpectedly ran into Julian again at a local coffee shop. He saw me, offered a brief, acknowledging nod, and said nothing. We didn't need to. We were both mere footnotes in the same concluded story. And Dahlia, I genuinely don't know where she is. I don't check her social media. I don't wonder, because when I walked out that door, I didn't just leave her behind. I left behind the version of myself that waited for other people to choose me. Now I choose me. I burst into tears of joy when I finally made this decision.